We all know that the US ban hit Huawei hard. We know that most companies, if they were faced with similar problems, they would have gone bankrupt by now. Interestingly enough, since then Huawei is still standing, and it doesn't look like it's going to stop anytime soon. So as a company, is Huawei worse or is it better? And with the launch of their trifold phone, this might make Huawei seem like they are ahead of the competition, like they are inventing new stuff, like they are innovating, and like the US ban isn't affecting them at all. But that couldn't be further from the truth. Let's get into a deep dive why that is the case, and the best place to start is the beginning. Not that far, a bit further, let's go to the time when the US ban hit. We are going to cover the most important stuff about the US ban, so if you have already kept up with that information, timestamps on the description down below. If not, it has been some years now since Huawei has been banned in the US. That on its own is not bad news, because there are bigger countries that you can sell products to, but the ban involved a lot of other things that would cripple any other company. They were banned from working together with any US company, which is a big deal considering that everything you need to have a good phone in a way or another is connected to the US. And those things are everything, like the chipset that you need to make a flagship phone, and the best chipset company is Qualcomm. It makes the Snapdragon processors, which are the best processors for phones. Now, Huawei was not allowed to buy their products, which in turn means that their phones wouldn't have the performance to compete with Samsung or Apple in any level. They would always be slower. But the worst part is that even forgetting about the device's performance, you wouldn't be able to use that performance anyway, because you need performance to run apps, and you need the Play Store to download apps, and the Play Store is on Android, and you couldn't make Huawei run Android because Google is a US company and Android is part of Google, so this makes Huawei phones just a pain in the ass to use. And it's not just the Play Store. Google has the best apps in the world. That's why everyone uses them and no one can compete, because they have the Play Store, like I mentioned, but they also have Google Maps, which many people need to use. Not to mention they have Google, you know, the search engine, which, let's face it, you need it for everything when you need to know a thing or two. And you have YouTube, which again you need to have it because everyone has it, so why should you be the only one not to have it? Plus there are so many more US based companies that a company like Huawei needs to work with. We are only focusing on phones, but Huawei makes laptops as well, and they weren't allowed to work with Intel or Nvidia and many more other companies whose components are essential to making laptops. I mean, you get the idea. A lot of restriction were put on Huawei, and to be honest, it was expected. It's not like they happened overnight, and I think even Huawei knew they were about to get banned. It just happened sooner than they had expected. Let's face it, Trump was already talking about how China is the #1 enemy of the US, and he even talked about how they cannot trust China-based companies, and Huawei security has been put to question several times, to the point where some government employees in certain departments are not in any way, shape or form allowed to use Huawei phones because of the security and privacy reasons. That on its own was a strong message towards Huawei, and it knew the US ban was coming. That's why they had bought parts and stockpiled them for months before the ban. By the way, if you find topics like this interesting or you like to know anything PC related, consider hitting that red subscribe button. It helps a lot and you will actually get to see content you enjoy watching, and I will be able to make it, so it's a win-win. Now let's talk about what did Huawei do to survive and how come they are still standing. Well, the answer is simpler than you might think. They started doing everything on their own. They were making keyring, their own processors. They even made their own operating system, the Harmony OS, which is bigger than it sounds, because it's been quite a while since Android had any actual competition when it came to a rival operating system that phones use. Except iOS, of course. Apple does its own thing. Now let's talk about challenges of doing everything on your own, and that has its own set of problems. They just recently started making, well, everything, and they are competing against companies who are doing those things for many more years. The other companies just had another kind of technology because of all of the research they have done over the years, but Huawei still kept on making phone after phone, and each phone looks cooler than the last, with the latest one looking the coolest. You have seen all the reviews of the trifold phone. It is extremely thin, it has good cameras, it has a thin bezel, it has a high refresh display, it is a marvel of engineering. That is what most reviews say, but they don't tell the whole story. And this might be just me, but it doesn't have anything that would make it usable in a normal day-to-day life. And I know this is hard to say and I sound negative, but let's just say that there is a reason why the front screen in Samsung folding phones is still gloss. It needs to be strong so your pockets don't scratch it, and the inside stay closed because they are more fragile. This Huawei phone, even your fingernails damage the screen. I haven't tested it myself, but there are people who have, and you can go and watch their videos. This is one of the most fragile folding phones in the market, if not the most fragile. But even if you look past that, let's say that you are careful, you will manage and you won't drop it. It is unrealistic, but for the sake of argument, let's say that you are the most careful person in the world. But then you still have to deal with the software, you still can't use Google Apps, and maybe you can find a way to use them, but it will will not be ideal. You will have a much better experience with a $200 Xiaomi phone. And since Huawei is doing everything on its own, well, when you do everything, you can't be the best. At least not the best at everything. So the processor, you know, the part that actually determines the performance of the device, is slow. Mr. Who's the Boss goes a bit further in depth about this topic, and I think he says it best. He says something along the lines of how this is not something that Huawei just does. This is all they can do right now. This is the best that they can output. But why now? Why not before, or why not a bit later? At least when the phone is a bit more durable, or at least when this phone has a bit more performance. Well, the answer is quite simple. They made something that looks awesome, it is functional, and to their credit, this is not something that you can do easily. This phone was not easy to engineer, and the factory process was probably even harder, but they still made it. And the answer about the timing is simple. If they made it earlier, it probably wouldn't even be usable. That is my opinion. They needed this to at least look good for marketing purposes, and the reason why they didn't wait to do it later until they perfected the phone a bit more is because other companies are doing similar stuff, and they know if Samsung or Xiaomi were the first to launch their trifold phone, then no one would care about Huawei. Let's be honest, nobody cares about the second place, they only care about the first. And they were right, everyone is covering this phone, everyone is talking about this phone. Heck, this phone is a China only phone, and all creators, even the ones that are not in China, still somehow managed to get it, and they are reviewing it because it made the headlines. Even this video is supposed to be about Huawei as a company, and I talked so much about this phone, and I will get to the company part, but this phone just tells the whole story about Huawei. And like I was saying, it's just such a waste that it has all of this limitation because the technology is obviously there, but so many limitations that are there on the device can easily be removed if the US ban never hit. Imagine if this phone was an Android phone and could use all the Google services, and imagine if this could use the latest Snapdragon chip, which can even play some really high demanding games. Imagine the fun that you can have playing games on the go on that big tablet that fits in your pocket. Okay, it would still be fragile, but it would at least have a purpose. As it stands now, the only thing that it is good at is watching movies on the go. You can multitask, but it still doesn't have the same kind of performance as, let's say, Samsung folding phones. And Samsung phones are much more durable. The point that I'm trying to make is that this phone is a great concept phone, and it could have been a great product, but it isn't, and no Huawei phone will ever be. It might be mean to say, it might make a lot of people unhappy, and similar to most people, even I don't like what I am saying. I am all for more competition, more companies innovating, and Huawei innovates more than any other company. But if you want people to actually buy a product, that product still needs to be good, usable, and it can't be worse than the competition. It can't lack features that a $100 phone has. At least not when you are asking for so much more money. The phones that Huawei makes are not cheap. They could have been more expensive, but they are not cheap. Then again, all folding phones are expensive, but this one is a bit more expensive. So like I said before, this is not a criticism about triple folding phones. I think that innovating is good. The problem lies with every other Huawei phone. The main problem is its future. Where is Huawei headed? Is it going to improve? Is it going to keep getting worse? And the answer is a bit sad. Let's face it, Huawei is improving with every phone they make. Every single phone is better than the last, and they keep on innovating as shown with their latest triple folding phone. But they are not improving fast enough. They are just barely trying to keep up, and they can't even do that. The world isn't going to stop until Huawei becomes good enough. The gap between Huawei phones and other Android phones for some time looked like it was getting smaller and smaller, but other companies are just improving at a faster rate, and since Huawei can't get the best parts, they will always fall behind more and more. On the software side, I know that there are ways to get around it, and you can use some or most Google apps on Huawei phones, but you need to find a way to do that, and after that you need to find a way to maintain those apps, and those apps, they will be glitchy and will not work properly because the phone was designed to work on Harmony OS, not on Android. And not to mention, if you use Google on Huawei, that is probably not safe. What I am trying to say is that there will always be a better all-around phone than a Huawei phone, and the gap will not be small like Samsung versus Apple or Samsung versus Xiaomi. Huawei will always be left behind a lot, and I think the gap in performance and in the apps that people will be able to use is just going to get wider and wider. I know that in China it is still somewhat popular, but even there the competition is fierce, and now they started to go against Xiaomi. Honestly, I hope Huawei can keep afloat until they find a way to actually survive, because Huawei leaving the phone market is sad, and that is sad for everyone, because the people who actually lose the most are the consumers, because there is less competition. Finally, the last question: what is going to happen with Huawei? Is it going to go bankrupt slowly? Is it going to stop making phones and laptops and anything that requires any kind of connection with the US? Well, there are three ways this story ends for Huawei. If it was any other company, company, they would have gone bankrupt by now. So there is a chance that Huawei will go bankrupt if nothing else works out. If they don't come up with an interesting product in the near future, they will fail sooner or later. Let's look at the facts. The only country that Huawei is winning is China, and to their credit, they are still doing great there. But they are not going to be able to keep that advantage for a long time because of the competition. Let's take a look at Xiaomi, which has a similar strategy to Huawei. It makes interesting phones, it does crazy stuff, and tries to have competitive prices. But where do they differ? Because even Xiaomi is a China-based company, and the difference is, you guessed it, Xiaomi has Google. Maybe when you make lower-end phones, you don't need the best processor, but you still need the best software. And let me ask you a question. If you were to buy a phone and one of them was Xiaomi and the other was Huawei, both of them at the same price, both of them have the same performance. One has all the Google services, has the Play Store, YouTube, Google Maps, and all of that great stuff. And the other has, well, nothing, pretty much nothing. It has an app from where you can download other apps, but even that is not close to the Play Store. It probably doesn't have all the apps you need. It might have the majority, but not all of them. So faced with this dilemma, which phone would you choose? And most importantly, do you think that there are people who should buy the phone from Huawei? We both know the answer to that, so let's continue to the next thing that can happen with Huawei, and that is the removal of the US ban. The chances are slim, you know, because the guy who banned them just became the new president, and for some reason I don't think he has changed his mind about China-based companies. There's just something about the way he says China.
China. China. China. China. China. China. China. China. China.
The removal of the US ban could happen if they were to somehow prove that they are safe and they don't sell our information to the Chinese government. They could probably still work with the US companies. And if that were to happen, this could be interesting because they could compete at a new level with other companies. The reason for that being because they pretty much did everything on their own. They got better at doing chips and they started doing a lot of things with their operating system. So if they suddenly started using Android, then they could probably optimize it so their phones could work better. And this goes for the mid-range phones. They could continue making chips, let's face it, their processors are nothing to brag about if you are spending a lot of money on them. But if you were to buy a budget phone, then that's a totally different story. So if the US ban is lifted, I think we will see a huge competitor when it comes to budget phones in every market in the world, because let's face it, without Google services, not only the US, but no one except Chinese people is going to buy their phones. So this is one way I see them succeeding. And the last one, and this is the least likely, they might start making actually good phones. And I know it's hard to actually make that happen since they are doing everything on their own, but think about it, they are making everything on their own, so it's not far-fetched to think that they might actually start catching up to everyone. They already have their own operating system, they are making their own carrying chipsets, so the only thing they need is to refine those parts. Since I need to be honest with all of you guys, I will agree that they need to do a lot of refining, but they have all the ingredients to make something great, and they actually just might have the capacity. Just think about it, they have over 200,000 employers. Compare that number to Xiaomi and you will understand what I mean. They have the workforce, they have the scientists, they might be able to pull it off. And let's compare this company to a company that does everything on their own, and that company is Apple, and Apple has a lot less workers. And for Huawei, those 200,000 workers, they are not just standing there doing nothing, they are working hard, they are doing research, they are keeping the company afloat. And if that happens, and if they start doing everything on their own and actually come up with competitive products, then it will change the whole phone market. And no one can predict how it will change the phone industry. We can only speculate, but that is a topic for another day. Right now, I am curious to know what do you guys think will happen with Huawei and how is it going to change the phone market. By the way, don't forget to like, subscribe, and bye bye.